Well, here we are. So in this episode, I'm gonna give you 3 things you need to understand about braking in the wet. And for this example, I'm using a classical, Shimano hydraulic disc brakes, or maybe if you prefer, you can also, use the SRAM hydraulic disc brakes. Both of these hydraulic disc brakes work on the same principle. So basically, you would have the braking lever, which you of course pull, then you have the hydraulic fluid in the lines, and then you have the brake caliper, which inside has the brake pads, and as the fluid moves these brake pads closer to the braking disc, they squeeze the braking disc, create a certain friction, and then you have the braking. So for both systems, Shimano or SRAM hydraulic disc brakes, the working principle is the same. Alright, let's talk about this slippery enigma of wet weather braking, and this time with the modern marvel of disc brakes in mind. So even with the supposed consistency of disc brakes in the rain, they still throw up some of the challenges. And in my opinion, here are the 3 things about braking in the wet that you need to know about, and also pay attention to these 3 things. So the first thing I'm going to discuss is the so-called initial bite variation. So here is the problem. So disc brakes are loaded for their consistent power, and generally they deliver. But however, in the wet, that initial bite point becomes wildly variable. It's not kind of a gradual increase in power when you kind of pull the lever. It's more a bit like a random lottery. So let me give you a concrete example. So let's say you are descending a slick road and you just lightly tap the brakes to scrub the speed. And sometimes when you do that, you get an immediate reassuring grab, but other times it just feels like the pads are just polishing the rotors, and also with some minimal effect until suddenly they bite hard. And this inconsistency can lead to jerky, unpredictable braking, and even with a very smooth lever input. So I would say that almost the mystery here is that disc brakes are, of course, less susceptible to the rim contamination if you would have classical rim brakes, but still the water and the road grime can still get into the rotors and the pads. And also the exact moment when the water film is cleared and the pads make a full contact, it just seems to vary wildly when it's wet outside. It's not just about the less friction, it's also about this unpredictability of that initial friction, I would call it. So I kind of understand that the water can act as a lubricant in this case, and that the rotor needs to clear it. But for example, why this variance happens? Is it that the microscopic some kind of differences in how water and grime are distributed on the rotor, or is it the temperature of the rotor influencing the evaporation rate, or even with the improved consistency of disc brakes, this initial bite in the wet is still, in my opinion, a frustratingly random event. So this would be the first point you need to keep in mind always when braking in the wet, that there is this problem of the initial bite variation with hydraulic disc brakes. The second problem I want to address is I will call it the thermal lag in wet conditions. So what do I mean by that? So the problem is that even with the disc brakes, there is a noticeable delay in braking power when it's raining. So it's as if the system needs a bit of a moment to warm up before it starts working effectively. So here's an example. Let's say you are approaching some tight corner in the rain, and you apply the brakes earlier than usual because, it's wet. And there's this noticeable lag before you feel any significant deceleration. So it almost feels like the rotor and the pads, they just need to reach a certain temperature to effectively evaporate the water from the discs and then generate, some friction to stop you. So disc brakes are known for their very good heat dissipation in the dry, but in the wet, it basically seems like the heat dissipation works kind of against you. So this constant cooling effect of the rain prevents the rotors, in my opinion, of reaching the proper optimal operating temperature quickly. And that's why you have this kind of thermal lag, as I would call it, in the wet conditions. So it's not just, about the reduced friction, it's also about this kind of temporal delay. So is it the water acting as some kind of heat sink, preventing the rotors from reaching their optimal temperature, or is it maybe the pad compound needing a certain temperature to generate maximum friction? I'm not an expert in braking systems, so this is still a bit of something that I would say why I don't understand it. And the third thing that you need to be aware of when braking in wet is the critical role of tires. So, in this instance, the problem is that while the disc brakes offer the superior braking power, they can't overcome the limitations of the tire grip. So, basically, in the wet, the tire remains the weakest link in the braking chain. So, concrete example could be that you can have the most powerful, disc brakes in the world, but if your tires can't grip the wet road surface, you will still just slide. And a locked wheel is a locked wheel, even if you have, disc brakes or rim brakes. So the tire pressure and the compound of the tire are extremely important in these wet conditions. So there's this mystery that kind of interaction between the tire and the wet road surface is incredibly complex. You can even see it in the world of, Formula 1 and other motor racing. So the tire's ability to displace the water and also maintain the contact with the road and also generate the grip is crucial for the effective braking system. So how does this tire tread pattern influences the water displacement? How does the rubber compound interact with the water film? These are all the questions that I don't fully understand, and probably some more advanced tire engineers are still working on to answer. So even with the power of these disc brakes, the tire remains the ultimate arbiter of braking performance in the wet. So you see, in this video I try to answer or kind of point you in the right direction of 3 things you really need to understand about braking in the wet, and they were the initial bite variation, then we had second thing was the thermal lag in wet conditions, and finally there was this critical role that tires play when braking in the wet. So always, please keep in mind these 3 main points when you are riding in the wet. You need to brake in the wet, because it's a totally different, animal from riding and braking in the dry conditions. So this is going to be it for today. I hope you like this a bit different episode than my usual episodes. And if you do, leave some comments below, subscribe, and as always, I will see you soon in the next episode. Cheers.